Welcome to Happily Ever After is just the beginning. Keeping your relationship not just together, but happy, and we mean truly happy, is part art and part science. You've come to the right place. Here's your host, Leslie Dories.
I often wonder what people's responses are when someone asks them, how's it going? And if you're like a lot of people these days, your response is probably something like, it's busy, really busy. And that busyness almost seems to be a badge of honor these days. Unfortunately, it's really destroying what we say we want our lives to be like. And I was reminded of this last night. I was watching TV, and there was a commercial that came on, and it was a young couple sitting at the kitchen table having dinner, and both of them were glued to their smartphones. No conversation between the two of them, and then at the very end of the conversation, the camera drops underneath the table, and you see that she's kind of rubbing his leg with her foot, like that's the way they're going to be intimate. And, it made me crazy because I actually see this all the time when I go out. I'm in restaurants with my daughter or with my husband, and the people aren't even talking to each other. And a colleague of mine wrote a book a while back where he said that for a good, solid marriage, the partners need to be spending 15 hours of uninterrupted one-on-one time with each other a week. And when I ask my clients how much time they spend together, they look at me like I'm crazy, like we're supposed to spend time together. We don't have time to spend time together. And when I tell them that 15-hour statement, they really think I have lost my mind. But nothing thrives on neglect, and your marriage and your family aren't any different. And despite this ever-present pressure, it isn't necessary for you to give into it. And to talk about how you can change all of this immediately, I'm joined today by Dustin Reichman. He's author of The 15-Minute Marriage Makeover, and he's the creator of EngagedMarriage.com, a website that's devoted to helping married couples live a life that they love. So, Dustin, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Leslie. I'm really excited to be here.
Right. Now, the reason why I wanted you on this week as soon as possible is because I had read a blog post that you wrote, do this instantly to be happier. It may shock your spouse. Now, what is it that you're telling people that they need to do immediately?
Sure. Yeah, it's kind of the antidote to what you were describing in the intro there, which I've experienced firsthand as a dad of 3 kids under the age of 10. It's extremely busy, and what we found is kind of the way around that was to get away from this idea of having balance in your life, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about that, but instead to set some boundaries. And so really what this instant thing you can do to feel happier, to feel some relief, and to start feeling really closer to your spouse right away is to talk to them and just set one simple boundary. And we talk in the post, and we can talk here. What are some samples, or what are some things you can actually do practically to set up healthy boundaries in your life? But it was all about trying to preserve some special time and special time for different areas of your life, rather than trying this mythical balance of scales of all these, all the things, all the roles that we play. That's really unrealistic. And I wanted people to breathe easy, but take some action and do something practical that will make a difference.
Well, and that's really the case. I mean, and I tell people I have 2 children, and I tell them I don't have children anymore. I actually have adults because they're both over the age of 18. But, we've actually done a lot of that. And I remember driving my kids to their middle school, and there was this big billboard. And it was, on the billboard, it was, the goal. Have dinner with your family once a week. And I'm going, that's your goal? To me, that's like, but we have all these people where, I talk to my clients and they say, well, Susie's got soccer at, 5, and Joey has football practice, and then there's music, and, and I'm like going, I'm exhausted just sitting here listening to you.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that's the life of a lot of our friends. And, and it's not that we're immune to that either. I have a son who plays
a
lot of baseball. I help coach that. I do a whole lot also. But we kind of first and foremost set priorities, right? And some of these things bend, but we really are careful not to break them. So there are certain things that we do that puts our marriage, puts our faith first, then our marriage, then our kids, and then everything else. That's really how we try to lead our lives. And it's one thing to say that, and as you said in the intro, I think a lot of people would describe what they want their life to be like, but then the reality is they don't get there, and it's this kind of curse of busyness, and it's this feeling like we're always on, right? And I think the smartphones that you described on date nights is a really good example of that. Even when we do have the time to be alone with our spouse, we get so used to being busy that it actually becomes uncomfortable, and we feel like we have to constantly be consuming information or be distracted. We can't just be, and that's and that's the first step, I think, away from that is this idea of setting some boundaries and setting some really specific times that you will just be, because there are rules around these times to really make that a reality. And I think it's just vital. And I think it's one of the things that's tearing a lot of marriages and a lot of families apart right now is all the busyness.
Right. And, and I actually have clients who've told me that if they're not busy, they're wasting time.
Yeah.
And most anybody who has any kind of creativity, they say, well, you need that downtime to be able to process, to be able to experience. And I don't know, maybe is that what it is that people are just kind of afraid of their own feelings? And like you said, suddenly we're staring at each other across the table and I don't have anything to say to you. But part of that is because we've gotten ourselves out of touch, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we, it's chemical changes in our brains, and it's a drug to always have these little doses of information, whether it's a Facebook update or an email. And the only way away from it is to make it off limits. And it's not realistic for people to make it off limits, all day or all night, especially at first. But it's really starting, a lot of the themes that engage marriage and my book that you mentioned are about 15 minutes. And you mentioned the 15 hours, which I think is an awesome goal, and probably something that sounds completely unrealistic to almost everyone in American culture, at least. So what we talk about instead as a starting point is 15 minutes a day. And that's one of the boundaries, that in the post that I think is really important. It's probably been one of the cornerstone things that's helped our marriage really take a turn for the better. And I'd say the last 5 or 6 years, we went to a marriage retreat. We actually invited there to speak, which is ironic, and we did speak. But, as part of being in the audience, we picked up some things. And one of the key things we picked up was this idea of couple time, just being time to just be a couple and not be all the other roles. You're not a parent, you're not an employee, you're not a blogger, you're just a couple, and you're able to hang out. And it's not easy to do when you haven't done it for a while. And so what we kind of prescribe to people is 15 minutes of couple time a day. And that's one of the boundaries. So for us, that happens to be at around 8:30 every evening. So once the kids are in bed, before we go off and do other things, because we have a lot going on, we make a concerted effort to spend 15 minutes together, just my wife Bethany and I. And that might just be sitting on the couch with no TV, no phones, chatting about our day. It might be sitting on the front porch having a glass of wine if it's nice outside. The setting's not all that important. The idea is though that the cell phones are away from us. Yeah, the TV is away from us. It gives us a chance to start talking without any real goal in mind, and a lot of times those end up being the best conversations. A lot of times that becomes an hour when it was intended to be 15 minutes, but the 15 minutes is the sacred part of that. It's like, yep, I know at 8:30, I know I have to, write a blog post, or I'm doing a podcast interview tonight, and she may be doing, school preparation, but we can wait 15 minutes. We can do that at 8:45. At 8:30, let's just hang out and just be us, hold hands, chat, and it's really, honestly, made all the difference in the world. It's such a simple thing.
And it really is that simple. And what I always like to tell my clients is, most of us, if we're only spending 2-3 minutes, maybe 5 minutes at a time interacting with each other, then what we're at is what I call informational exchange. I had this meeting today, or Susie's doctor's appointment went this way, and we're staying in the fact kind of stuff. But like if you're talking about, if we're still talking 15 minutes, 20 minutes, a half an hour later, we're down into, well, how do I feel about what Susie's doctor said, or, what was my opinion about this? And we're now into that place where we're connecting at a much deeper level. And it's like you said, it doesn't take a huge amount of time.
Right. Yep. And a lot of times people feel stuck. So it's like, we haven't done that in our whole marriage. So what in the world are we going to do for 15 minutes? And it can be really awkward. And it's funny because you think back to when you're dating, and you could, 15 minutes was nothing. You'd call each other and you'd talk all the time. And, in my generation, we'd write handwritten notes. Now I'm sure it's texting and everything else. But it was like a constant. I craved being able to talk to her. And I think part of it's, being together for, in our case, 20 years, 15 married. But also, again, the culture's changed so much that everything's in Twitter speak, and everything is in small bite-sized, attention, that 15 minutes can seem pretty overwhelming. And so, the book 15-Minute Marriage Makeover, the whole thing is about what do you do? How do you find the 15 minutes? Because believe it or not, for some people that's really difficult. And then what do you do with that? So it's basically like 4, week-long themes that people can follow. They're just things they can do together for 15 minutes that will enrich their married life. And that helps a lot because that's the first question. Okay, so what do we do? And it's like,
what do we talk about? Right.
Yeah, for the first night, maybe we'll find something to talk about. And we try, I think at this point we've been doing it for many years. So it's okay. I think in our case, we're talking about the kids or whatever's on our mind. But for people who are starting out, we really try to give them some new topics, something a little deeper, and try to get away from kid talk, because as parents, like the default is always talking about the kids, right? And that's okay.
Right, or the bills, or the relationship, or something other than, how do you feel about this? I mean, I always love the topic of, okay, if we won the lottery, what would you want to do? And
right.
Right. It's like, okay, well, or even, what's on your bucket list?
Exactly.
What's something that you'd really want to do if time and money weren't any object?
Yes. Yeah, that's great.
I mean, I think there's lots of stuff.
Yeah, and there's some, and it's funny, you plant some of those seeds and the breakthroughs that happen. For us, there was a follow-up to starting this whole 15-minute thing in our marriage. I believe we were actually away for a day-long retreat. It was another retreat setting that we were speaking, but one of the things they had us do is, I think it's 15 minutes each. Like basically we'd break apart, we'd talk, and then we would write each other a letter, right? And the theme in that case was like something along the lines of, what's your dream lifestyle or your dream marriage look like? And for us, it was huge because, as we were dating and we got married in the early years, we'd discuss these things. What would our life be like, 10 years down the road? And then a lot of those goals we had hit and we were doing pretty well. But one of the things that we had talked about early on was my wife might stay home when our kids were born. That was something that she always wanted to do. And at this point, we had 2 children. We were on this retreat. She was teaching. She's a special education teacher. Very happy with that, and I was happy with what I was doing in my career. But we started writing these letters and started talking about ideally, and it was like, well, ideally, it would be nice if you were home, and it would be nice if I, had more flexible work so that we could travel more with the kids and do more things. And that's what I was telling her, right? And she's telling me, ideally, I would like to stay home. But we both qualified it. Like in her case, ideally, we'd like to stay home, but I know financially it's not feasible. And I'm telling her, ideally, it would be great if you stayed home, but I know you like to be independent, and I know you love teaching. Well, that sparked this conversation. It's like, really? You think you'd want me to stay home, and really, you'd like to stay home? And now she, a year later, we started planning from that point forward. Like, well, we could do this. So for we had our 3rd child, and from that point on, for the past 5 years, my wife stayed home. And I don't know, if that would have ever come about if it wasn't for the little conversation that we started.
Well, and I think that's the critical point is that, what I see a lot, and I'm sure you run into this, is we kind of end up putting these relationships on autopilot because something happens. We have another child, or somebody gets a new job, or like you were talking about, I want to coach the baseball team.
Yeah.
And it's how does it fit into the overall plan? And the problem is that most people don't have an overall plan. Even, kind of like you're talking about, well, ideally this would be what I would like to do. And,
right.
And then, like you guys found out, you guys were thinking in the same way, and then it's like, okay, well, let's see what we can do to make this happen. And then you've taken your relationship off autopilot, and now you're acting with intention about, well, here's where we want to go. How do we get there?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think what's common in our case, we knew each other so well that I had made assumptions about what she was thinking about that topic, and she made assumptions about what I was thinking on that topic. And it's not that even the assumptions were off, but we both, were open to other ideas. But we were both almost like, I don't know, scared is the right word, or we just kind of completely put it out of mind and dismissed it as a possibility because of the assumptions we had made over the past preceding, few years. And then, all it took was a conversation is like, well, what if, and why do you feel that way? And it's the things you talked about, getting past some of the surface talk, and really getting to some of the core issues. And that's just one of many examples in our own marriage. And, with engaged marriage, we've been fortunate enough to have over 5 million people visit our site, and we get to interact with a lot of couples. And that's, we're certainly not alone in that. And it's all about getting started, and comes back, full circle to where we started. I think a lot of people just immediately say, look, this is a really busy part of our time in our life, and, we're doing what we can do. Maybe later, maybe when the kids are out of the house, we'll be able to reconnect. And the unfortunate part is,
unfortunately, by the time the kids have left the house, by the time the kids leave the house, they're sitting there at the kitchen table going, who are you and what are you doing in my house? And we've lost the connection. And the critical point that we have to keep coming back to, I think, is it doesn't take a lot of time, but we have to make that time a priority. It's like, because I remember years ago, and I'm going to date myself here because my husband and I used to write each other love letters when we first got together. But I'm dating myself back to, there were a bunch of TV shows that I liked to watch, and they all happened to be on at 10 o'clock at night. And my husband wanted to go to bed at 10 o'clock at night. And so it was like he was going to bed and I was staying up and watching TV, and then all of a sudden I look across and wait, there's a VCR.
Right.
I can record all of these shows. And just doing that then allowed my husband and me to go to bed at the same time, which allowed us to spend time together. We weren't always being physical, but if we wanted to be physical, at least we were in the same place at the same time.
Exactly, yeah.
And both awake, and it was really that simple. Is I don't need to stay up for an extra hour and first off, none of the shows were all that put up against my marriage. None of the shows were important enough to do that. But we see this all the time with people, guys who have to watch every single football game. I'm kind of glad that the whole fantasy sports thing is getting a hit because everybody's spending so much time focusing on the games that they're forgetting who their partner is.
Right.
Or the women with watching The Bachelor or whatever the heck anybody's doing.
Right. No, and that's a good example. Of the boundary idea. So kind of my motto around this is forget about balance. Like that's maybe, I don't know, at some point in time maybe that was even possible. But the problem is people feel like if they're not perfectly balanced, then why bother? And then when they know they're not balanced, quote unquote, then everyone starts feeling guilty. And that's this whole idea of be happier by letting go of this idea of being balanced and instead focus on boundaries. And one that you just mentioned is one of the ones that we talk about a lot, which is going to bed at the same time.
Right.
There's a lot of boundaries. If someone has shift work or whatever, that's understandable. But if you're in the house at the same time, it's a great thing to go to bed at the same time. And my wife and I, struggled with that for the same reasons. I'd be up working late and she'd just go to bed, and it didn't seem like a big deal. But when I committed to going to bed at the same time, even if I was laying in bed reading while she slept, or if she watched a TV show while I slept, just being there at the same time in bed was helpful. But yeah, some of the other ones I think your listeners might be able to grasp easily and do something with. We have, like in our house, we have a blackout zone from 6 to 8 p.m., which basically means after we're all home and we have dinner as a family. So, one of them is that we almost always, as much as possible around baseball and things, we do have dinner as a family. And then beyond that, though, between dinner and when the kids go to bed is no phone, no computer time. And that's for all of us. So,
right.
Like my kids want to play an iPad or their DS, so they can do that before dinner, after school. But after dinner, no, there's like a 2 or 3 hour window there where I'm not checking my email, I'm not on the laptop, my wife's not doing that. And that's a huge boundary, and it's one that most families would really benefit from. Another,
you don't hear all the teenagers breaking out into a cold sweat right now.
Right.
What?
2 hours.
What? I have to put my phone. Well, and it's actually not just the teenagers; it's their parents as well. And
parents, yeah. And
this is Happily Ever After. All right, this is Happily Ever After is just the beginning on WebTalkRadio.net. I am Leslie Dories, and I'm talking with Dustin Reichman, author of the 15-Minute Marriage Makeover and the creator of EngagedMarriage.com, about how you can take back your marriage. If you are struggling in this area, I might be able to help. I offer a free, no-obligation strategy session that will get you on track to creating the marriage you've always wanted. So take a moment right now and send me an email at Leslie, Lesli, at FoundationsCoachingNC.com. That's Foundations CoachingNC.com, or give me a call at area code 919-924-0463. And now I'm going to get back to this great conversation about how you can set boundaries around your relationship. And, Dustin, you talk in the article about multitasking, and everybody seems to think, well, I can watch TV or be on my iPad and I'm still present with my partner. Can you kind of blow that out of the water?
Yeah, I think the simplest way to put it is that multitasking is a myth. I think it's been proven a myth from every study out there. I do a lot of reading on, productivity, time management, business things. These are just things that I geek out on. And it seems like you're doing a good job, and it seems like you're achieving multiple things at once, but you're really just honestly not. And I think if you do an experiment and you try for a day or a week to always be present in the one thing that you're doing. So, that's as simple as when you're writing emails at work, only write emails at work. Don't have your phone beeping at you for Facebook notifications. Don't try to do an email while you're on the phone with someone. Just do one thing at a time. Your focus is so much clearer. It's been shown that when people try to multitask, when your brain is actually, it's almost like you're intoxicated, right? It's like you're just not having your full function. And from the time you switch from one task to another task, it actually takes you up to 10 minutes to kind of get your brain actually fully focused on the task at hand. So if you're in this situation where you're constantly switching from one thing to the other, like you're trying to talk to your wife while you're on your laptop and your kids are asking you questions, you're not getting you're not giving anyone their full attention. And I've been guilty of this. A lot of the things on our blog, a lot of things in the products and the workshops that we do is all from personal experience, and then going out to people like you, Leslie, true experts in the field, and finding out how to fix them, and then fixing them in our own relationship and sharing that with others. And one of the areas that I feel guilty about in my past is I would do just what we described, whether it's my phone or it's my laptop, during that window of family time after dinner and before the kids are in bed. I'd be sitting there on my phone, browsing or doing an email, and inevitably my kids would either want to play or they'd ask me a question, and I'd kind of, give them a quick answer, and I started realizing that, look, I'm in their eyes, I'm ignoring them, right? And then as they got older, they started telling me that, which is really hurtful. It's like, Dad, you're not even listening.
Right. Well, that's
Dad, I just want to play, Uno or whatever, and you're on your phone all the time. And they started saying stuff like that. You're on your phone all the time. It's like, oh my gosh, I got to get rid of this.
And it's, and interestingly enough, because I was just reading the other day about a study that was done, and it was a study in dating. And it was just having the phone on the table, not looking at it, but even face down on the table, that the partner thought that they weren't as important or they're being listened to. The person wasn't even looking at the phone. It was just merely there. And that to me was a really interesting finding. And we do it all the time. I mean, it's like I said, when I watched that commercial last night, I wanted to yell at the television because we're normalizing this. We're saying this is how you should be living your life. And what you and I are suggesting, which is probably, definitely the way I was raised, because there were no computers when I was growing up. There was, to tell my children, yes, there was television. I did not cross the country in a covered wagon, despite what you think. But, I mean, even now, people just automatically turn on the TV. I've got a couple right now where, they turn on the TV in the morning and they're not talking to each other. I said, turn it off. And they're looking at me like, what do you mean turn it off? It does have an off switch. How did we get so consumed by this busyness and getting away from, so a goal is to have dinner one night a week with your family.
Right.
How did we do this?
Yeah, I don't know exactly, and I hope the pendulum will swing the other way. I mean, I'm 36 years old, so I've had the benefit of living in kind of two generations. So, as I was growing up and then even up through when I graduated college, I had an email account, and when I got to college, I had an email account. But in high school and before, and I've been with my wife since high school, we didn't have email, we didn't have phones. We had old school landline phones, but we didn't have.
Right, they were attached to the wall. Yeah.
Right, everything was long distance, so you couldn't talk. You had to be pretty focused on what you were talking about. But my point being, I've lived that part, where it's like it was handwritten love letters, and it was, we loved to talk on the phone every moment we could, and just hanging out, sitting on the couch, talking and being with friends and things like that without all the technology. And of course now I live in the generation, especially, having an online business and being plugged in that way, that I see the addiction to it. I mean, I think it's truly an epidemic. It's an addiction. And it doesn't take everyone sees it, right? I mean, and you go out, try to go on a date night with your wife or your husband, and sit there and watch. I mean, just look around. 80% of the people will be on their phone during dinner, whether they're families or they're a couple out, at a nice steak restaurant. It works all couples. You still look, and it's like they're not even talking. They're just plugging away on their phones, and I know what they're doing. They're just looking at Facebook. It's nothing important. It's all things that'll be there in the evening after the date. But if they're so conditioned to it, it's like mice going to get the next hit of chemicals out of in a test situation. It's just this constant feeling of anxiousness if you're not checking it. And I think it's,
but somehow they don't feel anxious to be disconnected from their partner.
No.
And I'm wondering if they even realize that they are.
I don't think they do, and that's where the reaction to like the post that you're talking about. We get those reactions, whether ironically they'll come via social media, but it'll be on Facebook, it'll be a Twitter message or an email, and someone's like, look, we've been doing this our whole marriage, and I'm glad you said that because I'm starting to feel like he doesn't appreciate me anymore. He doesn't ever talk to me. All he does is sit on his phone on the couch, or all he does is play video games, computer games, and things like that. And it unfortunately, and I'm sure you see it on the practice side, where this will manifest, and all of a sudden it's like a breakdown point, and someone's completely fed up, and they're ready to get divorced, they're ready to split up because they've grown apart or they don't feel appreciated. And a lot of that comes from never having real conversations because we're so distracted. So I don't know. It's funny. It's almost like a pornography discussion where it seems innocent enough, and that's how it starts. But then it grows and grows. It becomes an addiction, and before you know it, that's always I never saw this coming in my own relationship. Before I knew it, she didn't want to have, we didn't want to be intimate anymore, or she, had an affair. He had an affair because he felt like I was never truly there for them. And so much of that comes from just not having as little as 15 minutes a day to reconnect and just be with each other as a couple. And it's so frustrating sometimes to know that's I'm sure that's not the cure for every ill, but for a lot of people, that would make all the difference in their world.
Well, but part of it also is, and one of the things that I always tell my clients when I tell them, because any marriage person worth their salt always suggests date night.
Sure.
And I actually suggest date night with a couple of rules, meaning you cannot talk about the children, you cannot talk about work, and heaven forbid, do not talk about the status of your relationship. The purpose is to go out and have fun. Just have fun, reconnect, and do this. And it's kind of what you're saying is that if we did this on a daily basis, if we stayed connected, then when we do have to have a hard conversation, whether it's something about the kids or something about our relationship or something, we have the foundation, the connection, the closeness to have that conversation in a safe way, and our relationship doesn't spin out of control because, oh my gosh, we're now talking about this hard subject, whether, like staying home, do I want to stay home with the kids? Can we afford it? That can be a hard conversation to have, even though it's
Sure.
a positive conversation.
Yeah, or you're faced with debt, or you are faced with an addiction, or you're faced with an in-law or a parent who's sick and you're going to have to be away caring for them. If the only time you talk is when there's really hard things to talk about, yeah, it's really difficult. Whereas if you're in the practice of talking and you have an open relationship that you talk on a daily basis, you do have date nights on a regular basis, it makes the hard stuff a whole lot easier to handle. And that's just, the date night's just another example of a boundary. So when people hear boundaries, it's got this negative connotation, like you're limiting yourself, but it's really very freeing to know that as hard as this week is, I know, Thursday night I get to have a date night and we're going to go do, have dinner and you don't have to get out of the house. We can't afford a babysitter.
Right.
All the objections. You can have a date night.
Right.
The kids are in bed. You pour a glass of wine. You don't have a TV on, and you just hang out, or you play a card game, or whatever you want to do. But you can do it at home. It doesn't have to be some elaborate, expensive experience. And I think if people can make a boundary of, we always have date nights on Thursday nights, or the second and fourth Thursday of every month are date nights, then look, I'm not going to schedule a social event. Kids are going to have to miss baseball practice, or whatever it is if it happens.
And it's not going to be the end of the world.
Right. It's all scheduled, and it's part of our family. It's part of our marriage. It's a boundary, a healthy thing that we've established, and it puts us first in our schedules.
Yeah. So I want to go back to the article because I'm looking at these things, and I have to get this out here because we're talking about this, and you say spouse time is not work time, so you can put your phone away and actually have a conversation with your husband or wife. Kid time is not chore time. At least you say not always. So you can play with the dolls now and be present. And I think that's really what you're saying here is how do we make it so that in this moment I am really here with you. Yes,
and I think the struggle there is, like you said, is type A personalities, or it's just we're always feeling like because time is so scarce that if I'm not being productive or I'm not learning something or I'm not doing something, it's a waste of time. And so that's always the thing that pulls us into multitasking. So can I sit there and play with my kids, play the game of life without having to feel like I'm
check your phone,
checking my budget, or thinking about my next adventure or blog post or what I'm going to do with my friends this weekend. How can I make it to where I can actually sit there and do that and not feel, ironically, feel guilty for the things I'm not doing? And the way to do that is to have specified time for the other things too. So if you have work time and you're able to leave that during work time, or in this case the chore time, meaning, look, if I know I have to pay bills this week, but if I know every Sunday afternoon at 2:00 I spend 30 minutes paying bills, well then Sunday morning before church and the kids want to play a game, I know
You're
I've got
available.
dedicated time for the other stuff later. So this time is family time, and I can just do family.
Well, and I guess I'm wondering how we get people to stop looking at the care and feeding of their relationship and their family as a waste of time.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, it's like, okay, how is that a waste of your time? I don't. But maybe that's just me and because of what I do. But can you in the article you talk about a quick rundown of how couples can get started making this change, creating these boundaries. So would you just run through those real quickly for the listeners?
Absolutely, because you may be hearing all this and you probably would nod your head and agree, yeah, these are all good ideas. And no one would say, time with my spouse, time with my family, that's a waste of time. but that's how we actually practice a lot of times. So how can you actually make this change? I think the first step is to talk to your spouse about it. Say, look, I heard this radio interview. I read this post. Some really good ideas. I've been feeling guilty about this for myself, and I would like to be a better wife or a better husband. So can we, at 8:30 tonight when the kids are in bed, can we sit down for 15 minutes and just talk about our family schedule, right? So just kind of open a conversation with your spouse. Don't make it accusatory. Don't be like, look, I'm so sick of you. Make it about yourself. Like, look, I would feel better if I could set up some boundaries for us, and then sit down, and during that conversation, then you guys can share where you've been frustrated in your relationship when it comes to this idea of feeling guilty all the time about your time.
Right, and being careful not to attack your partner.
No,
that's really
so
critical.
I'm sitting there saying, look, I feel bad because, Braden, my son, told me I'm on my phone all the time, or I feel bad because, I'm sitting there wanting at dinner to have a good conversation, but all I can think about is work. And so I'm sitting here with you tonight so that we can come up with a plan so I don't have to feel guilty anymore. Do you have any similar feelings or frustrations? Surely your spouse will. They'll be like, I feel like all I do is laundry, and I really just want to, have some time to play a board game with the kids or invite friends over or have a date night. We used to do that. Why don't we do it anymore? And that is just opening the conversation, make it about you. And then at that point, I think the really important part here is to agree on just one boundary that you can do for a week, right? So it's not about wholesale change. We're going to change our whole lifestyle. You can always grow from there, but just pick one little thing. And it may be that 15 minutes of couple time. It might be the date night. It might be no technology between 6 and 8. It might be, wherever you're feeling frustrated. Just choose one thing and agree to that. Start off simple and do it for a week. And say, look, after a week, we might decide this was no good, no pressure. We'll just quit. We'll go back to what we're doing. You can always go back, but just dedicate to each other that you'll agree on one thing that's easy and reasonable. Try it. If it works well, you can expand from there.
Right. So it's do one thing different, do just one thing, and commit to it for a week.
Yep.
Sounds pretty easy.
Absolutely.
So, Dustin, where can people find you and learn more about this and become one of the 5 million people that follows you on your blog post?
Well, I appreciate that. So the website is engagedmarriage.com. So it's engaged with a D on it. Play on words there, but engagedmarriage.com. If you come there, around the front page, you'll get to know a little more about myself, my wife Stephanie. There's an opportunity there to sign up for a newsletter. And, that's where we share all the new posts, any, special programs or experts that we brought on. The newsletter is the easy way. There's a lot of free gifts that you'll get when you sign up. So I would definitely encourage people to come over and sign up for the newsletter. If you guys are on social media, we're on all those as well. And it's Engaged Marriage kind of across the board on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that good stuff. Come over and we're real accessible right there on the site. You'll see to contact us, and if you have a question or you're wanting to dig deeper into this, feel free to shoot me an email there, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. And I'm sure Leslie can probably link up the particular post that we're talking about today to make it easy for you to find.
Oh, I will. And what's important to know is that we tell people what's important to us by how we spend our time. And if you only spend a limited amount of time with your spouse, the message you're sending, even if it's not the message you mean to be sending, but the message that you're sending is that your marriage isn't a priority. Maybe this is the message that you're getting from your partner, and they probably don't mean it either. But it doesn't really matter. If that isn't the message that you want in your relationship, then you need to take action now so your marriage will not just survive but will thrive. And so keep listening for more ideas on how to keep your marriage healthy and happy. And until next week, stay loving.